Welcome, everybody. This is our first little episode of a series that we're going to call the BS series for Benton and Sutherland's behavioral science bullshit. So the BS cubed, as you might see it. What we're going to be doing over the coming weeks is just chatting about behavioral science things that we've pointed out in the world, what we can learn from them, what we can take away, and what people can be doing alongside. So obviously we've got Rory on here. Rory, you all know him already, but him and I do the Mad Masters course together as well. So if you like the little snippets from these videos, you'll thoroughly enjoy the course. So welcome, Rory.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Yeah. Enjoying, by the way, weird newfound fame because someone has rather brilliantly taken little clips of me from various podcasts and goodness knows where and started putting them on TikTok. And within about 3 months, I've got something like 170,000 TikTok followers. And I keep being recognized in the street, or more weirdly, I think, at a Burger King at Seven View Services more recently. So that's been a strange thing, but it certainly demonstrates the power of TikTok.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, I've seen that. It's I remember because a lot of my day-to-day involves stuff around you. The other night I was sitting on the couch watching TikToks alongside my fiance, and your voice appeared talking about John Lewis in Tunbridge Wells. She turned over and she said, "Oh, bloody hell, he's not taken over this time as well, has he?"
I have to say, he chooses quite well. I think he's quite astute in his choices, and he clearly knows what plays well on TikTok. But it's fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, cool. I mean, an example of some behavioral science in the world with quite a key brand that we've seen this past week has been the Specsavers van up in Edinburgh, which I'm not sure if everyone's seen it by now. It's probably been shouted about all over LinkedIn. But Specsavers have parked a van branded with themselves in a street with one of those metal bollards which comes out. The van has been erected into the air with the sign, "Should have gone to Specsavers," all over it, which has been very popular and quite a simple method to play on that classic slogan.
That campaign was produced by someone who is one of the best copywriters I've ever worked with, called Graham Daldry, who worked with me in Ogilvy, London, going back 15 years. And he had a large family to support, and I think Guernsey offered him certain tax advantages. But he did something which was considered quite odd at the time, which was going client side and effectively becoming the creative director of Specsavers. But within about 6 months, he'd produced what is an astoundingly long-running campaign, but also a campaign which is just brilliantly versatile. I mean, it's absolutely glorious to see. You occasionally get it on Kit Kat, for example. You know, this used to be the staple of a great brand, which is you had a long-running campaign which stuck to its guns, but continually refreshed itself in new and surprising ways. And it's the kind of advertising like that for Heineken and Hamlet and everything else that caused me to go into this business in the first place. But it's now woefully rare. And I was having a discussion about that, actually, which is that if you ask the question, let's look at great long-running campaigns of the past. And then you ask the question, why did they stop running them? Well, I can think of one or two cases. You know, you might argue the best a man can get or something, although that's still debatable, where, you know, maybe you needed to change. Maybe you needed to refresh things a bit. Maybe, you know, you were, indelibly kind of seen as behind the times if you stuck with your old campaign. I would say, however, that in 90 to 95% of cases, there was no good reason to stop running that campaign. It was either like an agency falling out, or it was a new marketing director who wanted to make their mark. I remember, and I won't name any names here, working on a pitch that wanted to get rid of the fourth emergency service for the AA. And we were all working on this because it was a client insistence that we got rid of this line, even though we could see no good reason to get rid of it. But all of us kind of were working grudgingly because we felt we were committing an act of brandicide. And, you know, let's not forget that for a time, KFC even got rid of its finger-licking good. And I hope the work of, you know, the Ritzons of this world and the work of, you know, the Byron Sharps of this world has done something to at least slow that kind of ghastly attrition where good campaigns have a kind of half-life or a shelf life, not because of anything to do with their efficacy in the marketplace or the valuable kind of mental associations they've built over time. but simply because of some gratuitous political reason.
Yeah, I mean, you see the amount of people nowadays which think that a rebrand is essential or something's failing, so we need to do a complete rebrand or we need to find the new flashy. It's like the shiny object syndrome that you see, isn't it? Where people just always think, oh, there has to be something new and better that we can go to. But I feel like people are very quick to turn away from what has worked for them and what can be a success for so many years.
I mean, to mention, Mark Ritson has rightly defended the W.H. Smith's rebrand by pointing out, which everybody else seems to have missed, that it's a test. And they're testing the rebrand in 3 or 4 stores. They're seeing what the effect may be. Maybe, we don't know, after all, we don't know W.H. Smith's strategy. Maybe they have plans to branch out into other areas, given the massive decline in the sales of, paper-based goods. It wouldn't be that surprising if WHS or WH Smith wishes to actually reinvent itself to some extent. And, maybe that's not a crazy thing to do. But the point that Ritson made was it angered a lot of people. And I understand why, because I think a lot of people, are rightly sick of this kind of what you might call monolithic branding, where you've seen it in the fashion industry, where everybody from Burberry or Aquascutum, brands which had absolutely magnificent logos with a heritage of hundreds of years, are just effectively Helveticized into kind of Helvetica bold capitals or something similar, like some sans serif typeface. The argument for that, by the way, is mobile phone. That your logo has to work as a mobile phone icon. Well, now McDonald's full logo doesn't work as a mobile phone icon, but it's familiar enough that you can play with it, and a big bloody M will probably do the job. I'm sure there are ways in which you can actually make an existing logo work laterally in the shape of a mobile phone icon without destroying all your heritage and all the equity you have existing.
Yeah. I mean, do you think the WH Smith or the WHS, do you think that rebrand kind of brings them back to front of mind? I mean, I was chatting with someone when I first saw it, and they said, well, WH Smith, I can't remember the last time I actually went into a WH Smith, besides being about an hour early at an airport and needing to have a gaze at a new book and maybe grab a Coke Zero for the flight, because there's about 4 of them in Heathrow Terminal 2.
There are. In fact, they have a big advantage in Heathrow because they're actually the only shops that sell anything useful, apart from boots. Apart from boots and maybe curries, everything else is like the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré. It's high-end luxury goods.
Or suitcase stores, which I've always found rather interesting.
Just about understand the suitcase store, which is landside, because you might have turned up on the Heathrow Express and suddenly realized that your suitcase is disgorging rubbish all over the place. But the airside suitcase store, in my defense, I have once bought a small case at an airport because I had too much to carry, too much hand baggage, and I wanted something small with wheels. So I basically consolidated my hand baggage. But why anybody would buy a ginormous suitcase is a complete mystery to me. I don't know what the hell's going on there. And it's one of those mysteries like, why is it that the people who do key cutting also do shoe repair? And why are heel bars and key cutters the same place? And it's one of those things, it's just the rules. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a lovely contrast, by the way, which is between the retail you get at, for example, Heathrow Terminal 5 departures, which is mostly luxury goods, and it's because people are going off somewhere else, and it's who they want to pretend to be. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you go to the retail environment at Gatwick arrivals, which is people have been away, they've got back home, and it's simply about what people really want, not what they want to pretend to be. And all you have is Marks and Spencer Simply Food, Costa Coffee, and Greggs. It's the holy trinity of British high street retail. There, you can actually say it in the same rhythm, can't you? The Marks and Spencers, the Costa, the Greggs, and the Costa Coffee. You can cross yourself as you say it. But I always love that, because actually it's the opposite. I'm going abroad, so I need to go to Sunglass Hut to buy some Dolce & Gabbana sunglasses, versus I've got back home, oh, thank fuck for that, I can get a microwave chicken tikka masala.
It's the whole thought process behind it, isn't it? It's very much the same type of thing when you fly out to somewhere like Turkey or Greece, where you're getting onto the plane with certain people and they're in their Nike slides, the slash into socks and the tracksuits, and you're on the same flight on the way back with these people, and all of a sudden they're in Louis Vuitton jumpers with the Gucci sunnies and all the latest designer wear. The type of people that say, "Oh, the fuck me, that was £1,000 back in the UK." There's a bloke selling it for £10.
Do you own any slides? Because Australians were always big on thongs, weren't they? Which actually have a central toe divider. I don't own any slides. I know that they're really, really fashionable. They must be hugely high margin because you can pay sort of 120 quid for a pair of Dolce & Gabbana slides or whatever. But are they comfortable to wear? I've always wondered.
I've always been a big fan of the Rip Curl Leatherman sandal type flip flops that you get in Australia. Certain ones, if you pay the extra $10, will even come with a bottle opener built into the sole of it. So if you ever found yourself drinking a VB on a warm day without a bottle opener, you could quite easily just take your flip flop off or your thong off for Australians.
You can open your bottle with your thong. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right. But tying it back into Australia there, I mean, I was over there in January, February time, and I noticed that quite a few things. I hadn't been back for about 2 years. In the parks there were these weird things that I ended up looking up afterwards, and they were called desire paths. People might be referring to them as different names and everything like that. But what it was is there was a central path, mainly running, say, through. They have a Hyde Park in Sydney as well. Not quite as illustrious as the one here, but it was a one long path, and then off the sides of it you saw these little zigzag paths which had no real set formation to them. They looked like they'd just been kind of put anywhere. And I looked it up, and it was because they put one central path, which is what they expected people to walk along, but they knew people would always take shortcuts off the path. And even if they'd pre-built them and preempted them, people probably still wouldn't follow them. So they put the main path down, waited until people started taking shortcuts. They then saw that a dirt path had formed where most people had been walking.
And then they paved it.
Then they paved over the top of it to then make it a much easier route through the park.
I mean, there could be a dangerous effect to that, which is it's very clever because there are certain things which you cannot predict. You know, you could get all the data you wanted about traffic patterns and where people in the park were most likely to enter the park and where they were most likely to exit and what they were likely to head for. But in some circumstances, and that's true of sort of campuses as well. I know they do that with some campuses. If you've got a campus with a big lawn in the middle, you can't really tell what the traffic pattern is going to be between different departments. So you wait and see. Now, there can be a risk, of course, which is that people often follow in the footsteps of others. So it could be that the first few journeys are quite arbitrary, and then other people just copy them by walking the same way so as not to trample any more grass down. So you've got to be careful there isn't a kind of feedback loop. And what's interesting about it is it's sometimes used as praise. Because sometimes it's a really good idea, which is you cannot predict where people are going to want to walk from and to and by which route. So instead, leave it as grass, see what people actually do, pave what people do, don't pave what people don't do. Don't pave those areas of grass where nobody would want to walk there anyway. It's clever. But there's a similar phrase which is often used as a criticism, interestingly, which is, I think it comes from Boston, and it's called paving the cow paths. And the criticism of Boston was that when they decided to modernize the city of Boston, instead of coming up with a proper grid or a plan, what they did is they just took the existing paths which were designed for cattle, effectively, and paved over those, rather than having a bigger idea about how you might lay out a city. No. So what's interesting is that there are two behaviors. One of them, I think, is often praised for being intelligent. In other words, don't attempt to predict in a sense, what you can't predict. Instead, test, find out what people want to do, and then effectively respond. You know, and you know, you'd see that. I mean, the whole of Zara works like that to an extent, which is you throw things out in the store, you see what people buy, and then you have a very fast feedback loop that manufactures more of what people buy and less of what they don't, or none of what they don't. But it can be. It's also worth noting that sometimes, of course, in the case of Boston, you might have argued that, look, actually the cow paths were chosen for reasons entirely different to the reasons for transport people now have in Boston. And what you're actually doing is enshrining in concrete something which was out of date to begin with. So, by the way, I've heard of that case being used. And broadly speaking, I think if you can, and Jeff Bezos would call this a two-way door, if you are gifted by circumstances a period of investigation and discovery before you have to commit to a decision, always take advantage of it, because it will always tell you something you didn't expect. And I'd say that about testing in direct marketing. That there are people in direct marketing who are quite good, way better than average at predicting what'll work. But I've never come across anybody in direct marketing who's infallible about it. And quite often you get real surprises. I remember a mailing for BT, which was twice as successful as any previous mailing. And it came down to the fact, I hate to say it, that there were rabbits on the envelope. And my explanation was, look, you're all looking for serious explanations here about, economic optimism, or what is it in the marketplace that's causing this, or and so on, or is it the advertising? And I said, it's just as likely to be the rabbits, to be absolutely honest.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of ties in. I mean, I can't remember. I think it's module 7 of the Mad Masters course. The whole thing around herd behavior, and I feel like that kind of ties in perfectly there, right?
Yeah, no, I think there are certain very predictable things about humans, by the way. If you look at the number of great campaigns that have featured an animal in some way, they probably have a greater hit rate than campaigns featuring celebrities, actually. And have everything from the Dulux dog, which, by the way, happened by accident. The dog wandered into the chute and they decided to keep it. And you have, obviously, a lot of the work of John Webster at BMP. You had the Cresta Bear, you had the John Smith's dog, Tonto, I think it was called. And you realize that actually ads that feature animals, and probably brands that feature animals in the logo, if you did the same analysis, I can't prove that, just have a disproportionate rate of success. And one explanation for that is we're humans. We've evolved to pay attention to animals.
Well, I mean, the good example there is the Madfest bear. We've used that since the start. It's very recognizable to the fact where if we ever see just a random statue of a bear, we always end up getting a team photo in front of it for some reason now.
No. It's a great thing to do. I mean, and the problem about it is that unless you dress it up in evolutionary psychology, presenting to a board of a company and saying, we're going to feature a duck because ads with animals in tend to work better, doesn't make you sound sufficiently serious. But that doesn't mean it doesn't work. I mean, actually, really, really stupid things work really, really well. And I think the urge to look, we have this phrase, dare to be trivial, in the behavioral science practice. The urge to look deadly serious is sometimes an obstacle to creative progress, actually. The urge to have absolutely solid intellectual foundations for everything you do that look good in an APG paper is mostly a healthy aspiration, don't get me wrong. But there are occasions where actually, certain things like jingles, I think, have died an unfair death, not because they ever stopped being, as I said earlier, about Specsavers. A lot of great campaigns died not for a good reason. Long copy press ads, for example, long copy advertising in general, and jingles, or auditory branding, as we like to call it. I think those things died because of fashion. I don't think they died because there was ever a good reason to stop using them. In fact, as fewer and fewer people use them, there's an even bigger reason to use them, which is they become more distinctive.
Yeah, cool. I mean, that's pretty much the whole thing now, especially with the big trends on TikTok and everything. If there's a trending video about a funny cat that's going around that everyone seems to be sharing, you see more and more brands and agencies jump on their own TikTok account and create a meme with this cat doing something stupid, but it has something to do with their brand.
Tim Berners-Lee said the one thing he never predicted about the World Wide Web when he first created it was the extraordinarily dominant role that cats would play within it.
Yeah, I mean, there's something always quite good about watching a video of a cat doing something stupid. Doesn't quite live up to the hype of the OG YouTube video of the monkey pissing in its own mouth. I think that still has to be probably one of the best YouTube videos of all time.
Sal, I've seen one or two things, which I always remember in the age before the camera phone, I saw three women walking down Queensway in burqas, each of them carrying an Ann Summers bag, which was I always thought would have made a fantastic shot because. Of course, one great advantage of that clothing is you can carry anything you like because no one knows who you are. Okay. And the second thing was just the incongruity of the presumed modesty in public and behave and dress in private, if you like.
So, all right, we've entered the age of awesome, essentially, where too many people and too many brands, I feel, use sort of like a PR strategy or their entire brand strategy just around shouting about simple things they're doing and using the term #awesome or screaming about it in that way. I mean, and in this day and age, Rory, do you sort of think that is an effective way of building a brand?
First of all, I think too many people have been sold on the idea you can exclusively build brands on the cheap. That Specsavers campaign works because there is also television behind it. Okay. Now, no one is a bigger fan of guerrilla activity, social activity, creating memes. I love all that stuff because, well, it's but actually it's the accompaniment. It's not the main course.
Yeah.
And I think, too many people have been sold on this idea that you don't need to actually establish, widespread familiarity. You can do everything through these various channels. And I think you can do a lot through these channels, but I don't think you can do everything. And the other thing is that phrases like awesome and phrases like design classic, it's like being funny. You don't decide you're awesome. You don't decide you're funny. Other people decide that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so there is that kind of, slightly annoying immodesty to, generally what made British advertising particularly good is that the advertiser tended to be quite understated about their achievements. And that came with, if you like, as one American commentator on British advertising said, that British advertising acknowledges that maybe, just maybe, the brand or the product isn't the most important thing in the consumer's life right now. And therefore, you introduce it obliquely and gently rather than being full in their face.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who the American was, but it was his observation that what he liked about British advertising was this kind of slightly understated acknowledgement that you do have other things in your life to think about.
Yeah. I mean, there's that brilliant, what is it? I think it's probably my favorite ad of all time, but it's that classic, I think it's the Carlsberg ad, where it's the British family on holiday, and it's somewhere sunny, somewhere in Spain. And the dad wakes up and he's on the balcony and he looks down at the beach chairs around the pool at 6 a.m. as there's a horde of other people ready to take the chairs. And he skims his towel from his balcony across the pool. It's the Union Jack towel, and it skims across the pool and lands perfectly on the chair. Reference. Exactly. And then the Union Jack unfurls, and then it's a can of, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but I think it's Carlsberg. It might be Carling. I can't remember the exact one, but it uncurls. I think it's Carling Black Label. That's the one. I'm
fairly sure he then, which is a very, very in joke, he then turns to the camera and says, "Turned out nice again," which is a George Formby World War II kind of catchphrase. By the way, there's a fantastic ad in Australia, which my daughter sent me, which is either for Lidl or Aldi, which shows someone going into a store and with a shopping list where nearly everything is crossed out. But then it turns into this unbelievable sob story, which is that she can't actually buy her, what is it? It's something ridiculous like cheesecake mix or something from Aldi, and will have to go somewhere else. And it ends with the acknowledgement, "We know you use other shops." but
Oh,
come
how good.
effectively, but come to us first. And that's a brilliant ad, because
Mm,
again, it has that reasonable acknowledgement of a consumer that you're probably not going to do 100% of your shopping at a deep discounter. If you can
yeah.
dig it out and share it with the podcast, that'd be great. It kind of turns into a kind of rainy scene, and she's almost tear stricken at the fact that she's going to have to be disloyal and go somewhere else to buy
Yeah.
one other thing from her shopping centre, only to be met with the "Don't worry, we know you see other people" message from from the cashier. And it's a beautifully simple ad, but actually to an ingenious strategy. I thought it was really brilliant. I was saying to one of the deep discounters, look, the best way to persuade people to shop with you is not to say, buy everything from Lidl, buy everything from Aldi. It's to say, go to Lidl first.
Yeah.
Because if you go to Lidl first, you'll find 95% of what you want at a pretty low price. And then you can go somewhere else, either for the treats or for the obscure items which they don't stock.
Yeah.
And you'll find
Exactly.
yourself probably saving a lot more money that way than if you do it the other way around. There's been a debate, I was just emailed about this actually, about this practice of refusing, in other words, only offering discounts in supermarkets on certain products to people who carry the club card or the Nectar card or whatever it may be. And a
Mm,
few people are claiming that it's unethical. Someone has reported it, I think, to the Office of Fair Trading or whatever they call themselves nowadays. I don't think it's unethical. I think there's a behavioral science angle to it, which is that exclusive discounts or earned discounts have a higher perceived value than discounts which are just price cuts.
right.
So if you say save 20% because you've been a customer of ours for 10 years, it's a Sky loyalty program. Everybody who's been
Yeah.
a customer of Sky for 10 years gets the platinum level. We give you extra stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, those discounts, those things, because they're kind of earned or qualified or restricted, have a higher perceived value as discounts than mere price cuts. And they also probably don't devalue the product to the same extent as just cutting the price of the product.
Mm,
So there are good reasons for doing it. The only thing you've got to watch is that there is a percentage of the population who have a huge aversion to actually joining loyalty programs. They're paranoid about their data or whatever it may be, or they just find the whole thing a pain in the ass and can't be bothered to get out another card.
mm,
And it's possible that those people will feel a sense of seething resentment if
yeah.
they encounter that practice too often. But I don't think it's acceptable to describe that as unethical, because stores offer different prices to different people all the time. What it has to be is it has to be transparent.
Yeah.
Where it is unethical is if let's say you're an online retailer and you just determine one segment of your base being not price sensitive and another segment of your base being price sensitive, and you quote different prices to different people. That would be unethical. I don't think
Yeah.
it's unethical to practice price discrimination if you're transparent about what you're doing.
Yeah.
After all, there's a value to all customers in having people share loyalty data, because the retailer can better supply people with what they want if they know who's buying what.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so,
I mean, is it trying to build like a sense of brand loyalty almost? Like,
yeah, I think. Well, I suppose it does give you a competitive advantage in that if you have more loyalty club members, you get higher perceived value from more people. So if you
yeah.
have a more successful, it probably does help you compete with, I don't know, Waitrose or something. I don't know if Waitrose does the same thing now. It's worth noting, of course, if you shop at Ocado, they have all your data already.
Yeah.
There are certain modes of shopping. I can't prevent Amazon from knowing where I live for fairly obvious reasons. I suppose I could order everything to a locker, couldn't I, if I was really paranoid, I guess.
Or to
But
your neighbor's house and just never tell them.
just sneak out. Yeah, sneak out when the van arrives. but at the same time, it's interesting that some people are complaining about it, because there is, as I said, a minority of people who really resent joining those programs. You might find, I don't know what on earth the situation is in Germany, but you tend to get very high levels of sensitivity to data and privacy in Germany, to an extent where, for example, there isn't really Google Street View in Germany, because so many Germans asked that their house be removed from Google Street View that it wasn't worth them doing it. Now, in Britain, there are people who ask their house to be removed from Google Street View, but they're vanishingly few, not enough to interfere with the value of Google Street View. In Germany, it's an order of magnitude or more common. And so it'll be interesting to note what would happen if you tried that in different countries.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there is another thing to talk about here. I mean, it's actually, this is on a slightly different note, but Lucky Saint as a brand have built a spectacular brand and actually have now developed a sense of brand loyalty, which is sort of what we were discussing there. We're actually off to see them in a couple of weeks, Rory. We're going to see a few of their team. And I saw a post that they're pretty much, what they're doing at the moment is they're not saying that Lucky Saint is a complete alternative to other beer brands and other alcoholic drinks. It's saying that their users are merely using Lucky Saint as a way to moderate their intake of alcohol. It's not saying you need to go on a night out and we expect our favorite people that love Lucky Saint and they're all brand advocates to only drink our zero alcohol beer. It's just a way for them to be out with their mates, have maybe one alcoholic beer, and then every second one intermediate with a Lucky Saint beer. And it's a brilliant way that they're positioned it, I think.
Well, it kind of keeps you in the round system without going weird by either having Coke or orange juice. It's worth noting that, you know, there isn't a huge plethora of tasty, cold, non-alcoholic drinks.
Yeah.
I always remember people who don't drink or people who've had to give up drinking saying they're unbelievably grateful for the existence of Diet Coke because without it, what would they do?
Yeah.
And what is interesting is that it seems to be partly a product of fashion, which is simply that there are far more people who don't drink or don't drink very much or can't drink. And I think it's also, in fairness, a product of technology where people got really good at this stuff. So there were non-alcoholic beers, the famous one being Caliber back in my youth. They were not really the full experience of beer drinking. Whereas, so you're absolutely right. I think the ability to drink 3 pints and effectively become intoxicated with only one is actually quite a pleasant. It's quite a pleasant option. You know, I was always suggesting to one of the non-alcoholic gins that they actually offered a half and half gin, which is not a double G&T, not a single G&T. It's a single shot of alcoholic G&T, and it's a single shot of non-alcoholic gin. Because you then have the intensity of a double with the intoxication of a single. Yeah. And interestingly, what has happened, though, technologically, is these are very, very good. The zero alcohol Guinness is really remarkably impressive.
Yeah.
That's an amazing approximation to Guinness. Zero alcohol Beck's Blue, I think, was very good. Lucky Saint, very good. There's a company called Mash Gang that makes really, really interesting and exclusively makes non-alcoholic beers. And it's interesting because, funnily enough, by the way, in Deal Golf Club, just down the road from here, they have an offer which is effectively golf clubs. Most people have to drive to a golf club because they're in the middle of bloody nowhere. And so there's a limit to how much you can drink in a golf club legally if you're going to drive home. And what they do is they actually have this thing where they pour you a non-alcoholic Guinness, and then they just pour the head of the Guinness from the alcoholic Guinness tap. So you end up with what is effectively a 0.1% alcohol or 0.3% alcohol Guinness, but with the full head that you get with an authentic pint.
Oh,
so you're right about that, which is that, I mean, one of the most interesting strategies in certain categories is just to get people off the false dichotomy of either or, and to understand. I remember working with Philips on electric razors, and I said, you don't need people to shave with an electric razor every day. You don't need them to abandon their Gillette. What you simply have to do is get them to buy an electric razor and use it some of the time, so they will eventually replace the blades. But I mean, blade replacement isn't a big part of electric razors' kind of business plan. You know, it's part of it. Obviously, people probably replace them far too infrequently, by the way. But I said, look, if you can actually, and I think this is actually probably true, by the way. I mean, I spoke to dermatologists and other people who believe this, that actually the best form of shaving is a random mixture, if you like, of sometimes shaving wet and sometimes shaving dry. And if you can get people into the mentality of it's both and not either or, rather like that great Mark Ritson point about bothism. You know, it isn't just brand advertising. It isn't just performance marketing. It's both. Okay. And I think what happened, we have a natural mental tendency towards either or rather than both and.
Yeah.
We have a natural tendency to sort of, Manichaean dichotomous thinking,
Yeah.
binary thinking. And then the second thing I think that happened in advertising was that nobody really wanted to go and say, the media environment is now more complicated, so you'll have to spend more. So the digital people went out, you can hardly blame them, and said, why don't you just spend the same amount you used to spend, but spend it on digital rather than analog? The correct and honest thing to have said would be capturing consumers and their attention is now more complicated than it was in 1978. And the natural concomitant of that, I'm afraid, is you're going to have to spend a bit more money doing it if you want to obtain the same, breakthrough competitive advantage. It still pays, but you just have to spend more to actually achieve it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that whole either or thing is, especially when you're talking about Mark Ritson there, that's a big thing that we encounter on a weekly basis, where a lot of people think nowadays, where, especially in course world, tying this back into Mad Masters, that it's an either or. And if they do one course, they're going to be set for the next 10 years of their life. And the Mark Ritson course is a fantastic course, and he's an absolute genius. But your course as well, this Mad Masters course, pairs so well with it, because you and Mark are obviously very different people.
I don't think we disagree about anything as far as I can.
Oh, really?
There probably are tiny details or individual pieces of advertising. He probably hated Whopper, the moldy Whopper, more than me, for example. I would argue on occasion, okay, that when you're a challenger brand, a number two brand, there is some virtue, to slightly breaking your own rules to make a hell of a lot of noise. That would possibly be a small area in which he might well have been proved right in terms of sales figures, but it does make a point indelibly, nonetheless. Okay, and but I don't think we disagree about anything fundamental at all.
Yeah.
I suppose the point of my course is actually it's what to do when you don't. Someone actually has written a book with this title, which I think is rather brilliant. It's what to do when you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Which is, there are moments, and a large part of good textbook marketing still holds true. And Mark's absolutely right to defend that. But it has always also been true that there are moments when the best thing you can do is actually rewrite the question, not come up with the textbook answer. It's to actually say, let's actually look at another way of defining this problem, because we've defined the problem in this way and we've made no progress so far for 5 years. It's time to actually answer rather like an exam. If you're stuck on question 19, there comes a point where you move on to question 20. And okay, there is quite an important, if you're doing maths or something, that kind of what you might call question strategy, in other words, when to give up, is quite an important part of success. And I would argue that there are cases where actually creativity is not I think we don't make this point often enough. There are cases where creativity is the icing on the cake. It's the it's the cherry on top. But there are many cases where creativity is not an optional extra. It's actually an essential component. And I think there's a problem there, because you can't get bollocked for an idea you fail to have.
Yeah.
Okay. You can get bollocked for breaking the rules of convention, or doing something counterintuitive, or doing something strange. Nobody ever got bollocked for what you might call failing to be sufficiently imaginative.
Yeah.
Businesses get punished for it all the time, but individual employees of those businesses don't generally get bollocked for what you might call creative cowardice. And that's because the difference between what you might call a sin of commission and a sin of omission, if you're a Roman Catholic. Okay, doing things wrongly gets you punished, particularly if you fail. Failing to do the right thing is not quite so easy to spot.
Yeah. No, fantastically put. And I mean, that emphasis on creativity there and everything we've spoken about ties in perfectly to your Mad Masters course. And yeah, I mean, and if you do like discussions like this, if you like hear Rory talking about day-to-day examples and how to build brands, how to be creative, how to use behavioral science on the day-to-day, then Mad Masters is definitely the course for you. We do have an intake coming up on the 29th of April. 29th of April, and it's already our biggest intake yet, and it's our most popular one to date. We've got the likes of Specsavers, Nestle, Snapchat, Fujitsu, X, formerly known as Twitter, on board. And it would be great to have as many people come and join as possible. So that's kicking off soon. It's been great chatting with you, Rory. I'm sure we'll be posting
it's
again
a pleasure,
a lot of
Sam.
videos, a lot of bits like this. And yeah, it will be keep an eye out for this space and keep an eye out for the next episode of the BS series.